Adam Grant is 31 years old. He's the youngest tenured and the highest rated professor at the Wharton School of Business at the University of Pennsylvania. If you're familiar with the Wharton School, you know that it's probably one of the best business schools in the world. His field is organizational psychology, basically the study of workplace dynamics. He regularly advises companies as to how they can get the most out of their employees and how to help their employees get the most out of their jobs. He has a very interesting credo. It's very simple. It's helpfulness. Now, organizational psychology has long concerned itself with how to design work so that people will enjoy it and that they'll want to keep doing it. Traditionally, the thinking has been that employers should appeal to workers' more obvious forms of self-interest, like financial incentives, work that's inherently interesting, or work that offers the possibility for career advancement. Well, Grant's research, which is published in a book called Give and Take, starts with a premise that turns this thinking upside down. His premise is this: the greatest untapped source of motivation is a sense of service to others. Focusing on the contribution of our work to other people's lives has the potential to make us more productive than just thinking about helping ourselves. In that first reading this morning from the Acts of the Apostles, Paul and Barnabas, speaking to the Gentiles, say this: "For so the Lord has commanded us, I have made you a light to the Gentiles, that you may be an instrument of salvation to the ends of the earth." A light to the Gentiles, an instrument of salvation. Isn't that basically what Adam Grant's research is proving? That we get most out of life, out of our jobs, the most satisfaction, when we are not just concerned about ourselves, but when we are being helpful, when we are making a contribution. Now, there are enough people who go around moaning a lot. Moaning like, I need to know the purpose of my life. Why am I here? How can I find my purpose? It's all so confusing, they say. Well, it would be confusing, or it is confusing, when we focus on what we need. But there's a clear answer when we focus on what the world needs. The world needs our help. We, each one of us, are here to act, for we are life's way of getting things done. We are here to contribute to life. We are here to make a difference. Now, I think most of us probably would say we would like to be successful. And the good news, which you might be surprised at, it's very, very easy to be successful if we measure the success by the contributions that we make to life. Martin Luther King Jr. said it the best, I think. He said, everybody can be great because anybody can serve. You don't have to have a college degree to serve. And then he said some great lines. He said, you only need a heart full of grace and a soul generated by love. A heart full of grace and a soul generated by love. I think it was 10 days or 2 weeks ago that Margaret Thatcher died. And David Brooks wrote an op-ed article in the New York Times on her, which was very interesting. He said her most pervasive influence was on her level of values. She was the voice of the ambitious middle class. She lionized the self-made striver. She championed those who possessed vigorous virtues, upright, self-sufficient, independent-minded, loyal to friends, robust against foes. I think we have to admit she was a light in her time, an instrument of salvation to so many. But one does not have to be a Margaret Thatcher to respond to the challenge that Paul and Barnabas give us in that first reading. If you're familiar at all with Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, who wrote that wonderful book on death and dying, she tells a story that I've remembered throughout the years of this cleaning lady at Doctors Hospital in Chicago. And she talks about this lady who would go in the rooms and clean the rooms of the dying. And she says that that lady had a greater impact on those dying patients than any doctor or nurse could ever had. It was her gentleness, it was her quiet conversation, it was her peaceful attitude that lit up the faces of those dying people. She was certainly an instrument of salvation and a light in the world. This past Monday was supposed to be a day of great celebration and great joy in Boston. And as we all know, it turned into such a horrific tragedy for our nation and our world. If you were listening to NPR on Tuesday morning, they played a very interesting tape that was made years ago by Mr. Rogers. And this is what he said on the tape. He said, "When I was a little boy and something bad happened in the news, my mother would tell me to look for the helpers. You'd always find people helping," she'd say. And I found out that's true. In fact, it's one of the best things about our wonderful world. And what did we experience in Boston? An immediate response from people, a huge wave of strangers who greeted all those runners who were stranded, visitors who came to Boston for the marathon. And these strangers, they offered their spare rooms, they offered their couches, their food, their cars, even their beds they offered to these strangers. Because that's what Christianity is really all about. That's what being human is really all about. It has been an extremely traumatic week for all of us. Horrific. The violence that we saw and what people had to live with this past week. And it could be easy to get depressed and despair over what's happening in our world. We need to be careful of that. It's also very easy to get depressed and question our own life, our own purpose, especially as we get older or retired, when we can no longer be defined by our work or our title. But Norman Rice says it so well. He said, "Dare to reach out your hand into the darkness to pull another hand into the light." We find our meaning, we find our purpose, we make sense of life when we do it together, when we connect with each other. There's a delightful film that is no longer playing in the theaters, but I'm sure you can rent it. It's Dustin Hoffman's first attempt at directing, and it's entitled Quartet. If you've seen it, you know that it's based on a true story of how the Italian opera composer Verdi bequeathed his mansion to so many of these retired musicians because in their prime, so many of them played at La Scala in Milan. But now, because of their circumstances, so many of them couldn't even pay their rent. Dustin Hoffman gave an interview about the movie before it opened, and he talked about it as a very affirming movie, yet one that's really based in reality. He said, there's this cloud of mortality hovering over these characters and binding them together. And then he stated that he asked one of the actors, Billy Connolly is his name, "What's the meaning of this movie? What's it all about?" And Connolly said back to him, "Well, the essence of this movie is don't die until you're dead." And Hoffman looked at him and said, "You got it all. Don't die until you're dead." What a great line. But too often, too many people die way before they are dead. So no matter where we find ourselves in life, each one of us is called to be a light. Each one of us is called to bring salvation to others. And let's admit it, we see it happening all around us every day. Parents who are raising their children's children, parents who are raising children with special needs, spouses who are caring for their husband or wife with chronic diseases or Alzheimer, single mothers or fathers who have been abandoned by their spouses who are now choosing to raise the children, the generous men and women who, days before the Boston Marathon, donated blood just in case any of those runners would be in need. And even in death, the generous men and women who sign up to be organ donors. And the list goes on that all of you could contribute to. Bringing salvation to others, finding our purpose, and being a light in the world. The youngest tenured and the highest rated professor at the Wharton School of Business, Adam Grant, he tells us that the greatest untapped source of motivation is a sense of service to others. He teaches organizational psychology at a great business school. And the reality is, he tells us it's all about helpfulness. And to quote Martin Luther King again, having a heart full of grace and a soul generated by love. That's what Paul and Barnabas are challenging us to in that first reading. And in the horror of what's happened this past week in Boston, so many men and women had hearts full of love and souls generated by grace.